All right. Well, we're right at time. I know there's a number of other folks joining, but I will go ahead and ask everyone, if you can, to drop in your name and organization in the chat. That serves as our official tally of who are here. I'm going to share my screen. Welcome, Joyce.
How are you?
Good. I got a few last minute cancels from people, unfortunately.
I know Julie won't be able to make it. She had another meeting.
Exactly. Yeah, just about to mention that. Thanks. Welcome, Dr. Overman. I thought we weren't going to get you today.
I'm just full of surprises.
Well, I'm glad. Really appreciate everything you've taught us over the years. Really glad you're here. So thank you. Let's see. Let me just check. There's Josh. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Great to see you. Hey, Brett. Welcome.
Thanks.
We've got Bonnie on. Still looking for. Let's see. Sarah Pace. Oh, there you are, Sarah. Welcome.
Hey there.
Yeah, that's we might get one or two more, but I think we've got the bulk of our crew for today. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for clearing your afternoon today for Rocky Mountain National Park. We have, as we agreed in our last meeting in Greeley, we're going to use today as sort of a special discussion forum. There have been a number of topics that have been floating out there, maybe conceptual, related to how we organize ourselves a little bit, in particular what we're going to focus on. So today's really an open-ended, what I would say, just a facilitated conversation. We've got 8 or 9 topics that have been shared by any number of you from our last meeting, as well as some kind of reframes over the last couple of weeks as we fine-tune the agenda. And we will go through all of that here in a moment. But just as a quick look ahead, I wanted to spend a few minutes on the front end and making sure folks are aware. We actually were able to stand up a new version of our website. So we've got that. It's still a work in progress. GPS, we've done some reviews on this, and but it's definitely going to be much better than our past cover site, if you will. And it's still going to be able to link back to the archives and all of the other documents that we've been collecting through all the years. So we haven't lost a thing, but we're sort of repapering the front end, if you will, and putting just some areas that'll be easier for us to administer as your facilitators and supporting the group. So we'll walk through that here in a minute, as well as our assessment of that. So there's a few more enhancements that we would expect to see over the next month or two in working with the Agricultural Department of Ag to sort of clean that up. And then we've got a quick update from Josh and company on the ongoing agency work around the NDRP review. And then we'll dive into really the heart of the meeting today, which is following up again as those concepts that we talked about in May. One that we really felt like needed to put front and center. So I've got that first, just to make sure we get some substantial time around this. Was, are there any additional metrics or measures that will allow us to show some sort of interim progress on the balance of all of our work that goes beyond just the glide path? It seems, it's really difficult to show how we're moving the logic, the research we're doing, all of the work. How does that really, how can we show that and share that in a better way to help define a broader sense of progress than just looking at the glide path? So that may include a number of things here we've listed. For example, what is the optimization of emission reductions? What can that mean in practice? We had some really good conversations about that in Greeley. Then there was, sort of follow-ups to that, or what is the change in some of these? What's the baseline? What data do we have and can rely upon? What might be missing? And then how do we, really think about the responsibility for evaluating that emission reductions? And then we'll take a break about 2:30 or so, and then we'll jump back in here with some 4 or 5 other topics that we want to make sure we can at least get some feedback around and maybe some agreement. So first thing up was, do we consider the expansion of the focus area to include Morgan County? One question was, do we have representation from Morgan, either from producers or staff? So we need to think about that. It was also asked if we should essentially evaluate in that area of progress that we might be able to make. Should we be considering sort of just the expansion and awareness of our work, education and awareness on our work across the region? And this may include, for example, working up some additional content on their website, the early warning system. Maybe there's some additional surveys or other work that we can do to really broaden and expand the awareness in the region about all the work we're doing and its importance and how people can get involved to help further the reductions that we seek. We also raised the question of, do we have just an opportunity here to think about, are there any particular research projects that we would like to sponsor, maybe collaborate with? What are some funding sources? And then understanding just in sort of maybe an inventory logic, what research is currently being conducted by CESU or Public Health and Environment, and what is planned. So just want to start maybe a list or at least a discussion around that of what's the inventory on research, and is there anything that we should be advocating for going forward? And obviously we've been doing some of this in the past, but this would be in addition to all of that. Then there was a question around the utility of somehow an aggregate or seasonal or finer resolution to the ag demographics, especially the focus area, and a potential correlation with the nitrogen deposition on a bottom-up ammonia emissions inventory. So that's one that we've shared in the past, but maybe haven't really focused on and need to take some time around. So that will be the last one in terms of the topics. I've saved 10 minutes at the end, and I'll just mention this now, Josh, if you wanted to at least tee this up so people can be thinking about it. There have been some questions around the August 7th meeting in terms of what would be available there. Josh, I'll turn it over to you if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and happy to talk about it now or talk about it a little bit later on. Couple of things going on. There's a lot of stuff that is on our plate with rulemaking, with federal actions that are expected, and just generally people finishing up vacations and getting ready to head back to school in early to middle August. And so for those reasons, as well as and I'll talk about this a little bit more in my section, but just getting the contract in place for Brian and his team, we may not be ready for a hybrid meeting the first week of August. And so wanted to have a conversation with this group about potentially doing something either later on in the quarter, hybrid, if we want to get the hybrid meeting in during third quarter, doing a virtual meeting sometime in third quarter and a hybrid meeting later on in the year. Would like the feedback from this team as to what is the most beneficial and valuable. And I think a lot of that also hinges off of kind of the rest of the discussion today about, where is this project going? What are the things that we as MOU agencies need to work on? What are the questions and things that the ag group would like to work on? And maybe there's an opportunity to kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, go to our respective corners, work on some of those things and come back with a more productive conversation, a little bit more than a month out from now. So just want to tee that up for discussion at the end and, get people's thoughts on that.
Perfect. yeah, so be thinking about that as, depending on the progress we make here or things that you'd like to share coming up at the next meeting. Want to make sure we have a thoughtful agreement around that. Thanks, Josh. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started on our overall agenda. So again, if you haven't make sure you drop in your name and organization in our chat. Again, that's our attendance record. And as always, we'll just take a quick glance at our guiding principles. These have been stable since 2021. And I won't read all these. Everybody here is familiar, but it's worth taking a moment just to glance through and remember what have been our previous commitments. I would think in particular today, as we talk about what is out there and what have we promised to tackle. And their last one. Okay. So again, that really should help us color all that we do, and in particular today, as we sort of take stock of what is there and what we want to tackle. All right. Next thing up, I just want to share, we do have a new website for you all. So I'm going to click on this. Is that coming up for everyone? Great. So you'll notice first is the header. We are now officially under the Department of Agriculture website. So we felt like this was the best connection given the Agriculture Subcommittee. Obviously, this we'll continue all the partnerships that we have and so on, but this felt like from the state perspective, the best place for us to house the new version of the site. And agriculture, the department has committed to help work with us and has produced this and will ability to massage this and adjust this as we go forward. So we're delighted for that partnership with Ag. You'll notice it's the same branding that we had before with the bighorn and cattle and crop at the front in terms of the pictures. And then we have this introduction here, which is, again, a lot of this right out of our purpose, but allows us to frame up what we are doing. And then particularly what we were concerned about, if you remember on the old website, there were a number of areas that we just couldn't effectively administer. There was a calendar in that we couldn't adjust. The permissions for that had been locked due to a disagreement with Google around that site and the functionality. So while we had the old site out there, we weren't able to really adjust it in a real-time way, and that was so the front end was very static. In this case, going forward, we'll be able to manage all of the elements you see here on the page. For example, and again, this is just where we are today, but we'll be able to replace whatever was the most recent recording of the meeting and be able to put that up relatively quickly after the completion. So, for example, today's recording, we'll try to get that up within a week or so. Up on the front page of the site. So if anybody's missed the meeting, they can simply have this come down here and immediately able to watch the most recent meeting. And then we also have the ability. So if you just look over here on the and actually I've got the link into the let me just real quick. Just make sure everybody has a chance to click on this and navigate themselves. I'm just going to drop the link to the site here.
I dropped it in there for you.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Appreciate it, Kate. Yeah, again, so, the ability here is you're navigating down the page. Then as you click on, for example, meeting minutes, now instead of, as was the case before, you had to work within the small frame of the old site, and you had to know which where to click on and which setting. Now we've mapped all of those same folders from the Google Drive to these front end links right from the homepage. So it'll be really easy for folks who want to see any of the old documents. We can see that now. As of even June, we've uploaded all of the past ones that we've got. And then similarly, as we're looking for support here, on technical resources, general information, and work group resources. So as we move through the future and we start to have more current documentation around some of our work groups, or we have additional documentation that we want to do, for example, presentations that people have shared, we'll be able to easily update those, drop those, still working through the Google Drive, but the appearance and the front end of this is now much more appealing and easier for anybody new to sort of navigate through. Now, that said, I just wanted to share one other thought around all this, and that was that from a overall, this is sort of our first pass at this, and so we've had one of our experts on at GPS can go through, kind of compare and contrast what's been communicated, what's been heard, and going back to some of the feedback. I went back and mined a number of emails I received from all of you about the website, and we've come up with this sort of from a user experience, a UX. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? So we want to make sure that the site actually communicates all of the details in terms from our mission down to how we support the engagement and discovery and access to resources. We want to make sure that we're clear about our purpose, our roles, and our activities. We want to make sure that for folks who want to navigate and find content, that's intuitive and overcoming barriers to that. For example, there may be producer perspective or researcher perspective or just general public. All of those, we need to be able to relate to people from their own technical background and their ability to navigate. So that's really important. And on the front end here, making sure that, from a homepage perspective, as we click through and we find things, that those links and the resources actually map through from a primary user goal, find meeting information, download guidelines, those kinds of things. So we're working through that. And ultimately, we've come up with a few more recommendations, but want to work with you all to see, okay, would you agree with those as an assessment, and anything else from today that we need to carry forward and we can use to again make additional modifications to the site as it is. So the first thing is, from our view, it is clearer, we're doing the right things on sharing the essential information, but there's a few areas for enhancement. And just want to, as you've seen sort of the basic flow from before, the first thing seems like we could do a little more around information hierarchy. There could be some additional contents, and I'm thinking of particularly some presentations, that maybe are better at summarizing the whole context for the group, and would help us to do some storytelling that are pretty important. So Dr. Collette's presentation, for example, from last time in Greeley, had a lot of good general background and then got into a lot of nuance. That could be something that maybe we would want to put up a little higher, perhaps put into a context area, or some storytelling about the project. Similar thing for Bonnie's presentation from last time, did a great job in summarizing what we know and what we are concerned about in a way that I think is much more accessible to some people from all backgrounds. So that's one area. There's some areas here where there are some good guides and some elements that we like, but are there, for example, another way to look at things? Maybe it's timelines or priorities or progressing through that. So sometimes you'll see it's just more obvious. Maybe there's a diagram that allows you to see sort of the beginning, the middle, and the end, or we've talked about potentially one of the visuals that has been shared in the past where, it's really clear that this is how, for example, the nitrogen would volatilize and be airborne and drop down onto the park. There have been some good visuals of that might help people understand just at a glance, what is it we're really talking about, and what's the physical process of transport, for our nitrogen. And then the resources such as the early warning system, it's not prominently featured yet. So we were thinking of actually having the link to the site there and maybe another blurb around that that says, hey, join the team, join the system here, and use this as a promotional venue, not just a communication vehicle. So those are 3 areas I wanted to pause on, see if you agreed on the overall observation of the site as you're navigating through it now. And you know, do we have some agreement here around the potentially what should be highlighted? Are there areas to help improve the storytelling, for example, maybe some visuals that you might like to have on the front page, if you will, and then anything else, like, for example, around the videos or the early warning system that should be featured? Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you putting this together to kind of give us a way to think through usability is probably the right way to say it. Because I think that's sometimes hard when you're looking at new websites or thinking about how to change websites. The usability piece a lot of times can get a little lost. And so I think that's really, really important. I guess on the last bullet point, and this is more of a question than a reaction. My understanding is that we don't have like a real time link to the early warning system. Would this be like a summary of what has happened recently? And part of the reason that I ask is that I think this is, you know, the early warning system is something that has been really designed in conjunction with agriculture and funded by agriculture, and would want to make sure there's a comfort level if we were going to more of a real-time display to the public than, you know, a use by the agriculture industry. So if you could maybe speak to that a little bit of what's intended here, and then I'd really like to get some reaction from the agriculture folks.
Perfect. So at a minimum, I would think a link to this site, to this page, literally, on the front page of the new site would be useful, right? And then a little blurb, you know, maybe it's something, it doesn't have to go into all of these, but it could be around the goal, that kind of thing, or at least a method of engagement, and so on. But there's this sign me up, right? This is what I was thinking was, you know, make it easy for people to find this site from ours. And if they want to get involved, then they can do that using all of the normal tools and methods. Of course, we have the challenge around funding and, you know, reorganizing this. So really interested in Justin. I see your hand up, so I'll just let you take it from here.
So I like the idea of a link to this page for information on the early warning system, and the ability for a producer to sign up through here to make it easy for them. I'm not sure what you mean exactly, Josh, with a real live link to it. I will tell you that CLA is in the process of, we now have the new early warning website up for producers to use. We've had a switch in web providers, I guess you would call it. I'm not a very techie person, so but the gentleman who had the code and managed the early warning system website for us previously has said he didn't want to do that any longer, and we're transitioning and still getting a few bugs worked out in this new iteration. So I don't know about putting a live attachment to it, but I think certainly making a link to this information here is important. One other thing, Brian, that you'd spoke to is some slides or information to tell the story about where we're at and what we're doing. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
My first thought is it can't be all the story of what's wrong and needs fixing. It also needs to be telling the story of what's being accomplished and the progress being made.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I certainly want input from producers on how they tell their story, if that makes sense.
I love that, and I'd be happy, Justin, to dedicate time to that in the next meeting. For example, maybe we could have some proposals. I could help with a draft, for example, in the intervening weeks to work with folks to come forward and just say, here's a small blurb on what's the background and our progress, that kind of thing. Something that, you know, I think about 11th grade English or something like that. That would really allow people to see the big picture here and understand what's happened. So completely appreciate where you're coming from on that, and be willing to work through a couple of drafts to get to something that really does reflect the consensus of the group here to tell that story.
And Brian, maybe if I could respond to Justin's question a little bit, I guess when I saw the bullet point on the prior slide about visualization, I was wondering if somehow we were thinking about visualizing or providing some type of a link to, you know, active alerts or some. I didn't really understand where it fit into the visualization piece, and that's why I was curious as to what the thoughts were there.
So it actually is there on the new page. I'm not sure whether it's working yet, but it's there. There's a map on the homepage that is there for current warnings. We don't have any right now, so, and I don't know when one goes out, if it's showing up yet, but I know that's something that's being worked on.
Yeah.
It would be right here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so that's again, I'm open to this.
I don't know whether it's all like I've exchanged some emails with the provider here, the folks that are developing the website. They've been great to work with. So I think the sending of alerts now is all good to go on the new site. But I don't know whether it'll like show up live on here yet or not.
I guess we'd have to test it, right? When we issue one, maybe just let us know, and we can, it might be interesting to just get a screen grab or something, you know, during one to say, you know, for example, this is what the visual would be, you know, something to that effect. Again, we have a lot of flexibility on that homepage. Obviously, we don't want to replicate everything that's elsewhere and so on, but we want to drive interest and you know, adoption, you know, of our thinking and how to work with us to succeed in our overall nitrogen reduction. So I would be delighted to help continue, you know, refining this and continue to put out new content as we have it, and you know, use that as a way to keep it fresh and people coming back. And certainly we should be promoting this between meetings with you know, folks to make sure that they're going to the right source of truth, not somewhere else.
And then maybe just one other quick question. If we put a link to this on a state hosted website, are there any concerns with if the general public were to sign up, approving those folks to get early warnings if they are not ag producers? I want to be thoughtful about, you know, if somebody, you know, we want to drive additional traffic, we want to drive additional knowledge in this program. But if there is a concern with environmental organizations, general citizens signing up, I think that factors into the consideration of whether this link should be part of what's on a state-sponsored website.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. I'd look to Justin.
Yeah, I definitely, you know, I hadn't thought through that, Josh. I'm glad you brought that up, because we rely on the early warning system to also be a data collection place, and we don't want folks, you know, inadvertently, even if they're not intending to, answer that they've done something or haven't done something. And yeah, I think we need to think through that and talk through that. That would be a very big concern now that you bring that up.
Mm.
I mean, it's always has been possible for people to do that. There are, you know, if you look at the list of who's signed up there, I mean, there's obviously a lot of ag producers, but there's, you know, researchers, there's some journalists on there that get the alerts currently. But I as far as I can tell, they're all signed up as not a producer, as Brian or whoever's driving just kind of showed. You can sign up as not a producer and just get the messages that way. Obviously, if somebody starts abusing it, then we'd have to deal with it. If somebody starts sending, you know, messages back saying they're doing stuff that is obviously not true, then we can deal with it at that point. But
yeah, I like where you're going, Russ. If I said it in my own words, you know, we police participation here to some degree already, right? There's a logical nexus. I would maybe ask the question, would we be willing to, if we suspected somebody was pretending to be a swine or dairy producer or something, we would reserve the right to either change their status to not a producer when we believe that to be the case. And then we would filter that data out, right? Their responses wouldn't be as valuable to us because they're not in the business. That's just a proposal, but that could allow us to kind of keep it clean on the data analysis side while still being open to people participating and seeing the alerts. Wouldn't hurt us if more people, journalists said, hey, we saw an alert today, that kind of thing. So I would like to have some of that information shared more broadly, but obviously they could corrupt it on the back end if they were bad actors. So.
Yeah, because I think that's the main difference in the system between if you sign up for I guess it's that other checkbox down at the bottom. Basically, if you're signed up as not a producer, then you don't have an opportunity to send feedback. But if you are signed up as a producer, then you can provide feedback. So
okay.
So it would be easy enough if we were at a stage where that happened. I think it'd be easy enough to just switch them to the other category, and then they would get messages that are pushed out, but they wouldn't be able to, corrupt the data or anything.
There we go. Would that work?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess.
I guess as long as that doesn't like break any state rules or whatever for your websites, because I'm sure you have more rules than the rest of us.
So one question that I have, and this would be to Josh probably, is one reason that CLA has chosen to fund the early warning system fully and not look for any outside funding is that protecting producer anonymity and aggregating data is extremely important to have producers feel comfortable in cooperating on a process like this. And when this is housed on a state website, it's not the state's product, but where is the FOIA Cora line at? And that brings me some pause, I guess. And it's not to hide anything. It's just, I want producers to feel totally comfortable that they can fully cooperate without having their operations drug into something. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. And I think, having a link to this website is different than us housing the data on a state website in a state database. So my initial reaction is I think this would not be subject to Cora, but I would want to maybe think about that and maybe ask a few questions internally. But having it just linked and having the sign up be handled externally from the state website, I think creates that delineation that you're looking for.
I would assume so as well, but it would be nice to get a legal interpretation on that, just to be prudent.
Josh, do you have an AG in mind that could help us with that?
I don't have one in mind. I'd have to ask who might have some availability, but
can I speak up real quick? This is Evan Cavanis. I'm the Division Director for Conservation Services. So this is the website where it would potentially be housed under my division. I offered in the chat that through our contacts with the AG's office, this seems like a very reasonable thing for me to follow up on if that's supportive.
Oh, thank you. Yep, I see it here. I didn't see that. Perfect.
Great,
yeah, we'd
thanks.
love to give Justin in this case, and really the community, the assurance that the data protections that the site itself, the early warning system site provides, would stand and would be separate and apart from any Cora request.
That sounds great. It would be helpful. I'll put my email in the chat, but if we want to write up like the exact wording you want me to ask, I will send that along.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll make sure we include that in our notes as well. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, having strong data, having producers be willing to provide information into this system, that from our perspective is the value. I think from the agriculture side, having that early warning and being able to make decisions is valuable as well for those producers. But as we're thinking about the future of this project and how to correlate data to events, how to look at precipitated or precipitation weighted averages, getting as much granular data around what is being done when these warnings are triggered is going to be really, really valuable in the future.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Good discussion. We'll continue to work for now. I think we could mention the early warning system as we do, in many of our documents. I'll just hold off on dropping that, making the edit to that link until we hear back with a definitive agreement that the CORA would not apply. And so to be conservative, we won't make that change yet. All right. So that I think I had one more slide actually on my on our assessment. Let me just make. Yeah, so we were talking about all this, and then one more slide. So finally, wanted to make sure we were pretty clear on exactly what we were going to do. So a visual timeline of the quarterly topics. This is another area that we think we can make some progress on. This would be introducing maybe a roadmap or some, again, visual that we could work on that helps tell the story, and then uses standard colors and all of the sort of things that we need to worry about from a true accessibility perspective. And then some recent accomplishments. I'd love to just have one or two bullets on what are some of the things that we've done lately that we feel good about. It could be the number of alerts. It could be the number of people that are participating in those kinds of things, and really adds energy to that homepage. We just talked about the promoting of the EWS and a section in there with an explainer. And again, we'll hold off on that till we're comfortable. And then just wanted to make sure that from the recordings and the YouTube strategy, so for all of our recordings, we make sure that they are, it's clear which ones are up front and that we're quick on the back end and working with the ag department to get the most recent one loaded up as part of the promotion of the most recent meeting. So when people are sharing notes, for example, or whatever, we want the notes to be accessible as well from the most recent meeting, which will have the links to all of the presentations from there if people want to see those. So just making sure that the combination of the video and the supportive notes come out in the same sort of the most recent activity section. So we'll be working on that to make sure it's really crisp, that people have, whatever is most recent right at their fingertips, and they can still dig back to find the archives and all the other previous ones going forward. Okay, any last thoughts on the website and the related issues there? Okay. Well, for that, let's come back then to the flow here. We still have, again, trying to recruit more crop stakeholders. Just a reminder, and I can go ahead and drop this link in. If there are additional people who should be participating from a crop perspective, we do have the ability to sign up and reach out to them. I have added everyone that's been indicated, but that's a sort of a rotating list, and want to make sure that we're current and have the broadest audience there, as we've may have lost touch with some of our crop producer representatives over the years. All right, so let's dive into the heart of the matter for today, and that is really this question around measurement. So when we think of the glide path and the commitments that were made, again, I'll just scroll down here, but the wet deposition nitrogen of reducing that by 50% over the next 25 years, starting way back in 2007. right? There's been concern that we're too focused on one measure here and that it's difficult to motivate and keep people entranced in our progress with something that is that difficult to achieve in and of itself, and that there may be interim measures that we should be thinking about and showing interim progress, if you will. And so the questions here are, should we revisit or at least realize some common definition of what, quote, optimization of emission reductions really means? This came up and there was some good discussion in Greeley around this. And I want to give us some opportunity to, now that you've had a few weeks since then, to think about this and know that this was coming. Has anybody thought, what might be needed to be said about optimization of emission reductions in the real world, if we can say it that way? And let's just kick us off. Justin.
Brian, I was wondering if I could share my screen.
Sure.
I had to put a presentation together for a meeting here the other day to kind of update folks on this. And I came across an interesting slide that kind of hit me and I thought might be valuable to share. Make sure I'm sharing the right one. Okay, can you all see that?
Not yet.
Oh, I got to hit the share button.
There we go. Yep.
I'm not sure which. Are you seeing a slide or are you seeing a picture of a
We see a slide with the progression
Okay.
Of pictures up to the right. Yep.
Okay, so in putting this presentation together, I came across this slide that I guess I had forgotten about saying before, and I did not add the text on the left, but I did add the circles to point that out. The hindcast, or our goal with let me go to the next slide. Our goal with the glide path is to get down to 1.5 kilograms per hectare. And looking at this slide, I didn't realize that was hindcasted back to 1950 deposition levels. And I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing I didn't remember until I put this together was that the modeling, when this project was started, predicted the levels in 2028 to be 7.1 kilograms per hectare if nothing was done. And so, yes, we're not at 1.5, which we're not targeted to be until 2032, but we're certainly not at 7.1 too. And I thought that was it just kind of hit me that we are making progress sometimes, even when we don't feel like we are. And then the next slide, we've talked about this in the past some, was we base our current years where we are at based on the 5-year rolling average. And we have these high spike years that are sometimes hard to explain, or they're based on high precipitation or driven off of high precipitation. And we've talked about, is the 5-year rolling average really what we should be measuring ourselves against, or should it be more towards annual deposition? And that really struck me. I got thinking about, this is a slide that Bonnie actually put together and shared with us in Greeley. And Bonnie, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to misrepresent your data. But this trend line is based off of years, it does cherry pick out these high years, because these high years were driven off of very high precipitation, which is something that I feel like producers and nobody is in control of. And when you take out those abnormally high precipitation years and you look at that trend line, when you get out to 2032, look, we're almost at 1.5 where we want to be, which that surprised me. The other question that Bonnie brought up at this slide was she had came across some, if I understood her right, and Bonnie, please jump in here and correct me, but you had come across some presentations from Jill Barron that may have said, and I'm probably oversimplifying this, but these high deposition years with very high precipitation may not be as significant to the ecosystem because some of that nitrogen is flushed out of the system. And so I think these are all significant things that we need to think about when we talk about where we are relative to meeting our goal. First off, is our goal at a 1950 level, deposition level, realistic in the first place, especially when you're using a 5-year rolling average and you have to take into account those very high precipitation years, which aren't in anybody's control. And if we look at an annual deposition basis like Bonnie did, and you took out those very high precipitation years, and I don't want to be accused of just cherry picking data, but I think we need to talk about, are those very high precipitation driven years, should they be included in the data set, because they're out of our control. So I don't have any answers for you, but just more questions to throw out as we think about how we tell the story of progress that is being made, because I think sometimes the progress can get lost in the data depending on how you parse the data. Does that make sense? And I'll stop sharing. And Bonnie, please speak up if I misrepresented anything from the slides you put together for Greeley.
Nope. I think you hit all the high notes. That's a good representation. And that quote about nitrogen being flushed is something I took directly off a slide from a Jill Barron presentation.
I had one question, again, trying to just parse this as a non-expert. When we say flush through the system, which system are we talking about? The atmospheric system, or the ground-based, or the river systems? What is flushing where?
My understanding was that it was getting washed out from the Lockvale watershed.
Okay.
So where it gets deposited, and then they're seeing it downstream. But
Okay.
It was quite a while ago, and my memory on that may be fuzzy, but yeah, essentially out of Rocky Mountain National Park was my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to be clear on which system. I see Brett.
Yeah, hi all. Justin, first of all, great thought there that flat is still progress, since the projections were that the nitrogen deposition would be increasing. So I think that's a really good idea. When it comes to trying to remove these high episode periods, one of the things to keep in mind is that those events have been occurring for forever, at least for the time period, any of the time periods that we're interested in. And so that is all incorporated into that critical load of 1.5, even though hindcasting is a uncertain. There's difficulties in what Jill was doing, although it seemed to work, and has been verified in various ways, or examined in various ways. So because we're seeing these high periods back in the 1950s, 40s, 60s, 70s, etc., I really don't think we want to remove those from the metric unless you recalculate the goal by removing those periods. And I'd also note that while that high deposition is happening under high rain events, it's still bringing in a lot of human nitrogen, human emitted nitrogen, and so it's not that's still in our control. I mean, if we reduce emissions, we should be reducing those events as well.
Thanks, Brett. Josh?
Yeah, appreciate the conversation around this. You know, one of the things we talked about back in May and even before that was thinking about how to normalize precipitation, and you know, the staff you know, in the air resources group at the Park Service, as well as CDPHE here, we've started to brainstorm ways to look at precipitation normalization. Is that a normalization over the entire record of this project, going back to all the way to 2007? Is that a 5-year rolling average of precipitation, which may capture more of the variability that we see over shorter periods of time? And so that's one of the things that we've started to look at. Don't have any preliminary information to share on that today, but did want to, reaffirm to everybody that that is one of the things that we committed to doing some investigatory work on, and coming back to this group with some ideas on what that might look like, what the benefits of would be, showing both normalized and unnormalized data. Really appreciate, Justin, the slide that you showed. That's a slide I've never seen before, being relatively new to this project. So really helps to add some of the historical context. I think it's something that we at the state struggle with at times in other emissions scenarios as well. I think ozone is a perfect example. We've reduced a tremendous amount of ozone precursors over the last 15 to 20 years. And that has mitigated growth in ozone formation, but the overall readings have remained relatively flat. And so that is often perceived as a lack of progress. And to your point, people often don't recognize that mitigation of worse impacts is still a type of progress. And so I think there's a lot to think about here in just the last 5 to 10 minutes of conversation, but something we are actively looking at and wanting to come back to this group at a later date with some ideas and some preliminary findings.
Thank you, Josh. Other reactions to what Justin shared, Brett's comment on? Where do we go with all this?
Yes, Brian, I would maybe like to explore a little bit of the idea of how this relates to optimization.
Yeah.
I think we are continuing to make progress over where we would have otherwise been. But I think that also relies on, ongoing cooperation, coordination, implementation of the BMPs to stay there and to continually try to find ways to get better. And so I want to say this in the context of, first, thank you to all the ag producers who are implementing BMPs. I mean, I think that is a huge accomplishment that should not be lost in this whole conversation. And I think where at least we at CDPHE envision this going is, how do we maintain that progress? How do we continue to look for ways to get better over the life of the project? And so I guess I would maybe ask the question in that way of, can the definition of optimization include maintaining what we've already done and looking for opportunities to improve?
Yeah. Yeah, in light of the commentary around the lack of an increase, right, is progress in terms of what might have been expected. Have we begun to flatten the curve by definition at that point? And does that count as optimization, or at least progress towards optimization? What do we think? Russ, you had something on normalization? Just saw your little chat. Sorry. Away.
Oh, Kate had put in something about the precipitation correction, but that's not really the kind of precipitation correction we're talking about here. That's a valuable method, what Kate posted there, but that's more relevant like for hydrology and flooding. Whereas here we're taught, right? I think the discussion here is like, how do you treat a year that has way above average precipitation? Because it's going to have it's probably going to have higher than an average deposition as well. And that should be accounted for in the glide path or in the calculations overall.
Yeah.
Not that our precipitation measurements may be unrepresentative also, but that I don't think that's the biggest source of uncertainty here.
Got it. Justin?
Well, and I think the question remains, does higher deposition in those high precipitation years have the same ecological effect to that sensitive ecosystem as high deposition in lower rainfall years? And this is above my pay grade and at science education level, but how do you normalize for the ecological effect?
Right. Any thoughts on that?
It's a great Joe Barron question, but I don't know. I don't know either. I don't know if Brett, if you have insights on that.
No, I don't have any insights on that, except that there's going to be a lot of nonlinearities in these type of systems. And if you don't want to just look at one. So, I mean, if we have a low precipitation year, is that a lot worse? So do we have to weight that more? What kind of weighting functions you would be adding? I'm going to guess we simply don't have enough information to be able to do that, but Jill would be the person to talk to.
Anybody have a chance to do that over the next few weeks to connect and frame the question as we would like Jill to hear it? I mean, she commented in her notes, obviously, that there may be that flushing effect, but that was years ago, as someone mentioned, and maybe we know more since then.
I can tee that up with some people that work on these things like critical loads. It's a question I haven't really heard before. And I imagine that if it is happening and it's important at Rocky Mountain, then it would be important in other ecosystems as well. So I'll follow up on that. That's an interesting question.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And Brian, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, okay. Let's see, when we talk about communicating interim progress, who is our intended audience? The public, policymakers? I mean, I would answer that as probably everyone. You know, we communicate with one voice generally on this kind of thing, and others, you know, may care a lot more than the public about some of the nuances here. But ultimately, we want to communicate clearly with everyone that if we are making progress or preventing a worsening of the situation, that message should be heard by all. That would be my answer, but I'll open it up to everyone here. Brian?
Yeah, and my comment's going to be on the sort of previous discussion we were having, that just to make sure that we're framing this question going forward with regard to the impact of high precipitation years. I wonder if there's a correlation, although I see some differences between what's done in regard to certain regulations coming out of EPA where we treat things differently. For example, in CAFOs, where you allow discharges from those non-discharge operations when you have a rain event that exceeds the 25-year, 24-hour storm. Sort of the logic behind that being that there is dilution that is occurring to that to make it to where those, you know, events that are unprecedented, one that you don't have to design to handle a Noah's flood kind of situation. I see a major difference here is that this is not adding just to floodwaters that are clean, if you will. Instead, this is what's coming out of the atmosphere, and so you're getting a lot of that water that has an elevated concentration. So I recognize that's different. I think one of the keys, if you're looking at those things that Brett and others are talking about, would be what is the existing condition in those waters of concern or in the ecosystem of concern. Are you adding a batch of high concentration water, or are you adding on a wet year where there may already be a lot of clean water there and so it's diluted? So anyway, I'm not sure I'm adding a whole lot to this, other than I was very intrigued by the idea that Justin presented as trying to understand what the impact would be. And then that sort of leads the question, do we think that these efforts that we're making to reduce nitrogen are potentially having a different impact on the low rainfall years than they are in the high rainfall events. So I think it's worth asking Jill the question, because it may help to either inform us that this is a rabbit worth chasing, or it's one that isn't worth chasing. The other thing I'll bring out, since we're talking about the 5-year average and dealing with that whole issue, is if we assumed that we were right on track each year and we were exactly following the glide path or glide slope, we would have a built-in bias, if you will, of about 0.14, and that may not move the needle, but just imagine, if you will, if we were right on the slope and we take a 5-year average, because we're considering also those events that happened 5 years previous, whenever the events were higher, that equates to a 0.4 bias in that. May not be a huge issue, but it's exacerbated by the fact that when you have high deposition years, that raises everything up. I just think that's worth considering as we move forward to think about making sure that we don't lose sight of progress that's being made because of the natural variability that's in this data. So I'll pause here and see if that makes any sense to anyone.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Justin, I see your hand, and before you begin, I just want to make sure if you could share a link to those slides or email me those slides. I want to make sure we don't lose that thread. Go ahead, Justin.
Okay, yeah, I can email you those slides to share. Brian, I appreciate your comments. I wanted to clarify one thing. It's my understanding, and it varies deposition event to deposition event, but a lot of times when we have high precipitation years, you don't typically have high precipitation and concentration at the same time. They may be low concentration years, so it's not necessarily that you have higher concentration. It's just that you have more deposition because there's just more being flushed out of the atmosphere, period. But again, I'm way outside my science background.
No, you're not, Justin. You're spot on.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Brian.
that makes sense. Thanks, Justin. I think that adds some potential validity to the example I was using of why, with regard to the CAFO rules and the requirements for runoff control structures, where there's not, it's allowable, if you will, to have those discharges in the event of a 25-year, 24-hour storm. I think largely because of the dilution that occurs in that situation.
Yeah. Very good. All right, so some progress on this, at least as a concept. Again, feel free to respond to the question here from Yvonne and around who's our audience. I think for now, I'm assuming it's everyone, but people will take their perception of some of the data with their, well, where they stand depends on where they sit sometimes on these types of things. And then I see Sarah has one. Are trends in precipitation increasing? Does this matter for the question of the goals and for hindcasting?
So the Park Service always looks at that, and my recollection from the last milestone report draft is that there's not seeing any trend in precipitation at Lockvale. So it's neither increasing or decreasing. So they always look at that, and I don't think precipitation was ever factored in for the hindcasting. It was more just we're looking at paleolimnological records and looking at a lot of different, some areas that are less impacted by human emissions, and then just kind of coming back to this point that we think this diatom assemblage change happens at 1.5 kilograms. So they're looking at total deposition over the year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
regardless of anything.
Yeah, the year-to-year variability in precipitation up there is going to be much bigger than any trends that have happened up to this point.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I was going to add is I think, and I know we don't have Christy with us today or Jim with us today, but I think they have done a little bit of a look at kind of different forward-looking climate models, and I think generally there is a lean towards a warmer, wetter park in the future, but I don't know if it's statistically significant or not. We'd have to circle back with Jim on that when he's available.
I thought I saw Jim briefly on the participant list for the record, but I know he's at a tournament, as I mentioned, so maybe.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
back
he was-
offline right now.
Yeah, he was going to try and call if he could, but didn't know game schedules.
So this is Joyce Kelly. So I just had a question then, going back to this flushing and then the long term. And I know probably less of the science than Justin claims to know, which I think he knows a lot. But have there been any testing to determine what is residual? I mean, so we know when it's dumped, but how much of it stays? And have we done tests to see how much of it's still there? Is that clear as mud?
Joyce, I think that was all what Jill was factoring in to her research, was looking at kind of this net export. They were looking at what supposedly, what fell in the park, what was in leaving the lock. So I think there's been a component of that. And I think Jill's maybe just looked at specific years, but I don't know if holistically, if there's been kind of like at an average year, what stays and what goes. But I think that was a component of her research.
Brett, can you add that to your list of follow-ups?
And exactly what do you want me to add now? Because I'm trying to type up some notes. So
Brett, I think the question is what type of research has been done around cumulative loading? How much is kind of additive to what already exists, and for lack of a better way to describe it, does the background concentration continue to increase with this cumulative loading?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
And that was probably a better description of what my question was than I gave. So yes, that's what I wanted to know.
One of the things that we'd want to inquire about on that is there evidence of a greater amount of dissolved nitrogen flowing out of the lock herself over time? And there's a long-term ecological research and monitoring program centered on the Lockvale watershed. Surely at some point someone has synthesized water quality data at the lock's outlet. They have data sets in the lock and the lock inlet and the lock outlet, going all the way back to the early 80s.
Thank you. Okay, so the follow-up then would have to include what if any measurements were taken at the as it leaves the lock, right? The outlet. All right. Other topics here to help us on possible interim progress. I think we've covered a number of sort of angles of this. There's questions remain whether we could assert that this lack of an increase, as might have been projected in the initial years, can be counted as progress, mitigating what would have been an otherwise expected increase. But we have a premise for asserting that at this point, right?
I would say yes, we do, and maybe more when we get our arms around this precipitation question, we may actually have a position to assert more progress has been made than previously thought.
Right.
Crossing my fingers and being hopeful.
Yeah, well, we can learn more and deal with new information. hopefully better. All right. Well, this may be a natural pause here. I'll just I just want to remind us that the topic that we have, I'm going to bring up our agenda again real quick. Again, this discussion of what optimization of reduction really means in practice. We've talked about what are we comparing the changes to? What is the baseline, right? Is that the correct baseline, this projection, or the glide path? What data do we have? What's missing? We've talked a little bit about each of those in terms of, this flushing effect and the locations, for example, at the outlet at Lockvale. The last question we had here would be, who would be responsible for evaluating emission reductions? That came in one of the comments that I got to the agenda. If that resonates to anybody, I haven't heard a direct response on that one. Josh?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the third bullet point if we could. And I don't know if this fits now or maybe fits in the second discussion here at the second half of the meeting about, what other research might be necessary. But, I think at the last couple of meetings, we've talked a little bit about not having had the time, the money, the opportunity to go back and evaluate past deposition events and determine how much of that came from the focus area, how much of that might have been transported from elsewhere. And so I do think that's still a missing component, and potentially something that, maybe we go through like the air quality enterprise or look for other funding sources to see what would be necessary to try and at least evaluate a couple of the higher deposition events to determine, or try to determine where we think some of those emissions originated from. I think that's a big part of this whole optimization question of controlling what we can control. And so, I know we've kind of had very high level discussions in the last couple of meetings about that'd be a nice thing to do if and when we have time and resources, but I think that's something we need to think about a little bit more intentionally at this point.
Yeah, reactions to that, Justin?
I guess I would ask Brett. Brett, I was thinking you guys did some considerable research into, I believe it was the 2013 year that had all of us scratching our heads. We didn't really understand why deposition spiked that high that year. And I was thinking you guys did a lot of looking at outside focus area sources. Was it wildfires? Was it something else? Am I misremembering? If that's correct, can you speak to Josh's question about how you guys went about doing that?
Yeah, so Christy Gebhardt, who's no longer with us, is the one that kind of led that up. And she did some back trajectory analyses. And obviously it was a high precip year. We know that. But what the back trajectory analyses indicated was that we had more frequent transport from high emission areas, particularly the Front Range. So we had more the potential for more transport of emissions from the Front Range and then the precipitation into the Rocky Mountain. That was not, it's a semi-quantitative analysis and is at least consistent with the observation of higher deposition in that period. It was the, 21 or 2, we also had, I forgot you had the picture up there, but we had some, another one of these very high deposition events. And that one coincided more with some increased wildfire activity. But the increased wildfire activity was not, my recollection was not a major, was not really a possibility for what happened in 2013. And this question of the contribution of nitrogen from wildfire it's an open and important question.
Yeah, thanks, Brett.
So
Dr.
this
Morales?
is, I'm sorry,
Oh.
go on.
Joyce, go ahead if it's followed.
Well, I just want to, I guess that I kind of beat this as a dead horse, but I just hope that we are forever comparing the deposition and actually activities that are happening across the, I mean, wildfire especially, that it's not, that we are not discounting and not forgetting to do a comparison between wildfires and this deposition, because I still think there is a lot that happens within the park system on a national and cross-national, like in Canadian forest fires that happen that impacts what's going on. And we need to make sure that we are doing that parallel and that we're holding all sources accountable to the deposition. So that's just, I don't want us to ever forget that. And we don't forget to note that.
Yeah.
It's certainly a regional problem, a lot more than Colorado Front Range.
Thanks, Brett. Dr. Morales? You're on mute.
Oh, great. The data in Lockville, is that, like, what is the frequency of collection? Because if the data is being collected, or it's like a representation of a week or 2 weeks worth of precip, how are you doing back trajectories to understand where stuff is coming from? Or am I missing something?
No, you're not missing. The way it was done is that they are weekly samples. Often in that week, you'll have a few hours of precipitation, hours of precipitation. We have a high time resolution precipitation monitor up there. So the trajectories only during precipitation events are what were being included in the analysis.
Okay. Yeah, from that, I have a million questions of, well, how long does it take for something emitted to be sucked into the cloud and then make it over? How do you know the storm was coming from this way, not from this way? I have so many questions. All right, thanks.
Okay. Let's see if we can get to those. Josh?
And maybe to build off of that a little bit, when I kind of asked the question to kick this part of the conversation off, I guess what I was really thinking about was, you know, some of the conversation at the last meeting with Dr. Schumacher and talking about, you know, when did we have, you know, notifications that hit and when did we have them that missed, and really starting to try to dig into those event specific types of things rather than more broadly looking at kind of an annual look that I think has been done on a couple of specific years previously, and really with the eye towards thinking about optimization of the BMP process. You know, what can we learn from the hits and misses? What can we use from that to try to both demonstrate, you know, what is working well, like I said previously, and look for if there are potential opportunities, you know, for improvement. So that was more of the kind of more granular dissection of the data that I was thinking about, that I don't know that has really been done previously.
That's a great idea. Fully support it.
Other thoughts on Josh's points?
And then I guess if there's nothing else on that one, to the fourth bullet point, you know, I think we at CDPHE kind of see ourselves leading on this one. We are typically the ones that are working on the inventories. We participate with EPA on development of the NEI data. And so I guess, you know, I kind of view us as being kind of the lead on the inventories and the progress assessment of emissions reductions that go into the milestone reports and go into presentations and things like that. You know, we've heard and highlighted some of the things that we want to look at, understanding the ammonia inventory better, particularly mobile sources, stationary sources, changes in methodology for the NEI, and what that would have potentially looked like in previous years if that methodology had been used previously. I mean, we saw a big step change that I don't think was supported by the data that Dr. Collette, presented at the last meeting. And so, that really seems to be an artifact of calculation methodology, not of what the atmosphere is actually seeing. And so, I think those are all things that, we are starting to dig into and would see as part of this, kind of plan assessment, ways that we can improve, ways that we can make the data more accessible to people, so that there's a broader understanding of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Russ makes a few points in terms of some of the presentation and papers that we've seen over the years from, Dr. Collette and Fishers and others there. Thanks, Russ. All right, so again, trying to wrap up this first section here, and we'll take a small break. Any other additional thoughts on, and I'll just bring it up again. We've got some to-dos here. Brett's taken some action items. Thanks, Brett, on the optimization and emission reductions concepts in terms of could we look at that curve with new eyes, I guess we could say, with Justin's slides as well, and some of that research from Jill and the follow-up around that, helping us with that flushing logic. The data we have, and I do think, Josh, you posed the question of what data is missing. I'd like to address that also in context in the second segment here. That may come up again, but I appreciate you putting that out now. In terms of what is missing for us to start to have more confidence in definite and a new understanding of interim progress and our ability and confidence in sharing that with the public. Really important to continuing and encouraging everyone to stay involved. If we can say what basis we believe we are making progress or preventing further degradations. And then your role around evaluating those reductions themselves at CDPHE, air pollution. Anything else on all of those? Good discussion, everyone. Appreciate everybody kind of diving into this and as squiggly as it can be. We've got some progress today.
Before we completely move off, the glide path, I think the answer to this question has always been a resounding no. But is there any room at all to reevaluate that end goal? And I understand that the more research that's done, it's usually continues to reinforce that as the level at which you might get the diatom assemblages to, I guess, take the top rank over the blue-green algae. And a lot of times it seems like additional research just pushes that level further and further down, which I don't want to do. But is that still truly the goal? Do we still really need to get to the diatom assemblages returning to what they were? Or is there another place we could draw that line in the sand and say, we're not getting the changes in lichen species and we're not seeing the changes in the animals at the park? I mean, again, I've always heard the answer to that is no, but I guess I would also ask, have there ever been any successes where nitrogen deposition has been reduced and there's been concrete evidence that the lake would return to that former condition? There's so many factors at play, and I know all the research points towards nitrogen as being the driver primary driver for that, but what is the confidence in that if we get to this level, we'll see that change happen? And then I would also like to hear from the park. We're always hearing that the west side is healthier than the east side, but I don't know that I've seen a concrete example of that. And so I would be really interested in what changes they're actually seeing at Lockvale, given that this has been kind of the status quo since we started measuring deposition. So
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. A lot there, everybody. Somebody could take a crack at that.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'll just make a note that there's more happening to the ecosystem than just shifts in the diatom. That's one of the indicators. There's a bioaccumulation of nitrogen in the leaves of trees, among other things. And I'm speaking a little out of turn because I am not a biologist and this is not my area. But even if the lake doesn't necessarily return to what it was 100 years ago or whenever, the hope and idea is that we prevent further changes within the ecosystem, which I think would be a huge success. Which is a very different question than what you are asking, and what that critical load was even based upon. As far as recoveries of systems, that's another really complex biological question. But in the eastern United States, where they have seen dramatic decreases in, say, sulfur and even nitrogen deposition, I believe they've seen some positive effects in the ecosystems. Certainly when they were having the massive acid deposition, which was killing some lakes and streams, that's gone away. So at least in these large senses where we've seen these very large perturbations, first plus and then minus, they have seen recovery. But
yeah, thanks for both of those, Brett. Any additional thoughts around that? We can include these as notes and try to get folks thinking about them for our next meeting as well. I don't expect everyone to have answers at their fingertips to such complex concepts, but Bonnie, appreciate you bringing them out again, and just as we learned to do, make sure we're checking our premise, right? That's the right one. No one's opined as to whether we could revisit that as a whole. I think we might assume that we cannot, like you, Bonnie.
Don't have the jurisdiction to say anything, but why not? Can someone explain to me why you couldn't do that? Is it money, or is it some statute limitation? Why can we not review this critical load?
it would be a question for the Park Service, because that's who sets the load. That load was set in response to, lawsuits, alleged, telling the park that they have that they are required to keep these parks in pristine, untouched conditions. And I think it's all, decades, they go through decades of research, hundreds of papers, all point to that, but it's a question for the Park Service. And I think it's probably just, that there is a large body of research pointing to this as the critical load. And we don't have, this group can discuss it, but we don't have any say in setting it.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie, for that. Justin.
So when the MOU agencies approached ag producers to support the withdrawal of the contingency plan in this process, that was actually one of the points that was discussed and agreed on when ag producers met with the MOU agencies to look at in reviewing the science, was both the 1.5 target And also, not only is it the right level, but is the time horizon that was placed on the glide path of 25 years the right time horizon? And in that meeting, there was agreement from the MOU agencies to look at both the 1.5 level and then the time horizon to that 1.5 level. And as an ag producer who participated in those meetings, it is my expectation that that is open for discussion. And if it isn't, then I think we need to have discussions about what ag producers agreed to in good faith with the MOU agencies.
Justin, for everyone, when was that? When was that approximately?
I would have to look back to remember when that was, but there were representatives from Park Service. Josh was there from CDPHE. Rebecca was there from EPA, and Jim and Kristen were there Jim and Christy, as I recall, were there from the Park Service. So there were representatives, key representatives from all the MOU agencies. I'd have to look back and remember the date.
No,
Yeah, maybe
Justin,
someone
that
else can
sounds
help
right.
if you're there.
Yeah, if I could just speak up, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Holly Salazar. I'm also with the National Park Service and the Air Resources Division. I work with Jim, and Christy Morris has accepted the early voluntary retirement option that federal agencies have provided. So Christy will no longer be involved in this group as a Park Service participant. So I can't answer for her. I can't answer for Jim, but I just wanted to address what Justin said about negotiating in good faith. Absolutely, if that was something that was discussed, and I believe in our MOU agencies calls subsequent from that, we did talk about that. I don't want to say yes or no either way because I wasn't involved in that, but we certainly, if that was a part of the agreement to drop the CP, then that certainly will be something that we'll discuss as a part of that, because we're not going, there's been no internal talk of we're not going to do that at all. So I'm just sorry Jim's not here to be able to answer that.
Yeah, we'll get Jim again. I know. Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, he'll
Appreciate
be
you
back,
stepping
sure.
up. It's
Yep.
it's a lot to ask you to do. That's where you are, but we're delighted to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank
Josh.
you.
You know, I'm feeling compelled to make a comment. So I feel like it's a settled question that we're seeing changes within Rocky Mountain National Park in the Lockvale area. And it's a pretty settled question that we know that the Front Range of Colorado is having is a significant contributor to that nitrogen deposition, as are many other areas. And so while we talk about the endpoints and the glide slope timeframes and all of these other things, that's great. We can discuss that at length. What we really want to see is some positive change over time. And that positive change would be a reduction in the emissions, or at least the stabilization with the rampant growth that we're witnessing right now. And that shouldn't get lost in all of these conversations of some of this minute detail about process.
Thanks, Brett. Josh.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, Justin, I think your depiction of the conversation that we had, I want to say it was almost 15 months ago, March of 2024, maybe even earlier than that, was sticking in my head. But you know, I think when we had that conversation and we talked about a plan assessment, we made a list of items that we would be interested in, you know, reevaluating, looking at the current data, understanding if those were the right decisions, and if not, what a better decision might be. And so, you know, I think that is my recollection of the question. And you know, as we've talked about quite a bit today so far, I think the the goal is very much supported by the science. We haven't had a conversation at all today about the timeline, and so I think they're related, but they're separate questions. And I think we as MOU agencies are committed to taking a look at those things, but that isn't a guarantee that those things will change. And I guess I just want to make sure that understanding is consistent with the group.
Mhm.
I understand that those may not change, but what I was hearing was it has been deemed and it is non-discussable, and that is different than a plan assessment. And the agreement wasn't this will change if ag supports. The agreement was this will be looked at and discussed and really vetted out to see if we need to make some tweaks. And as long as that is happening, I think ag producers will be in support of the agreements that were made. But if it gets pushed to the side and said, nope, this is holy, we're not touching it, then to me, that is a reneging of the agreements that were made. And that's where, as an ag producer, I have to stand up and say, well, that's not what we agreed to, and this isn't going to work.
And I appreciate the perspective, and thank you for reiterating that, because I think we are here to work collaboratively, and we want to make sure that relationship is protected.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank
Bonnie?
you.
So Brett, I'm sorry, I didn't, what rampant growth were you talking about? I
just
didn't catch
talking
the
about the
context of
human
that.
population in the Front Range.
Okay.
You can't deny that.
No, of course not. But even with that rampant growth, we haven't seen the projected
and I'm going back
levels.
to Justin's comment, which I think was a very fair and good observation.
And another thing I would say is we have been told that it is unquestionable that there are changes at Rocky Mountain National Park. I have tried to find a simple list of what those observed changes are. And I can find, the paleolimnological records. I can find a lot of modeling papers that show we think this lichen does better with nitrogen and this lichen does better with nitrogen, or there's increasers or decreasers. That's all modeled. I can find reports of sedges and grasses changing in Niwot Ridge. I would love a simple breakdown of here are the things that we have measured that we know have degraded in the park, because I've struggled to find that specifically for Rocky Mountain National Park. There's huge body of literature on this topic across the US, but I've struggled to find specifically Rocky changes that I can understand, I guess. And maybe I don't need to, these ecosystems are very complex. And I have also, there's a little bit of the soil end going up and the follicular leaves the nitrogen concentration going up. And it's just difficult for me to say that it's been unequivocally demonstrated, especially when there's so much modeling and we're talking about such minute levels and there's so much other uncertainty. So I struggle with it, is I guess all I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. I think I'll say this, as we think about the presentation as sort of the summary of the challenge that's facing us, and we want to frame this up for the website over the next, just as an example of how we can communicate better with the public. Stating this case in plain, again, 11th grade English would be helpful, Bonnie. So I can second that. I've accepted at face value some of the assertions that we've heard, but others from the Park Service, if you have some of that in, let's say, publicly consumable format or in a way that is digestible, that's the kind of information we'd love to have as the premise for why we are doing what we are doing. It can help motivate us and understand what's changing at the park.
Being somewhat new to this initiative, but I know it's been going on for a long time, I could certainly start that discussion within the Park Service to see what is publicly available. Happy to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen various assessments at different times, but some way of encapsulating this as a way to set the premise of why we need to take action, right? What is the burning platform, as is used as an analogy. So thank you, Holly. If you can find that, we'd love it.
Okay.
I know Jim has thoughts. He's not here, so we'll let you interface with him. I always try to channel my inner Jim, but this is over my head. So, all right. Well, we're a little long in the segment, but don't want to curtail this unnecessarily. Any last thoughts here as we think about this broad definition of our progress and what we should be thinking about? If I take this forward and summarizing just for a few minutes, it is our duty, I think, to evaluate this, right? We've agreed that we have the opportunity here, and we need to be able to communicate the progress that we're making to continue to engage producers and keep that community at the table. And if there's progress that is being made or degradations that are not happening, then that's part of this work. So appreciate everyone willing to go into the vagaries of all of that, which are pretty substantial, as we've learned today. I got a thing from Brent. Hold on. And anyone document an attempt to construct a mass balance of N for the park or for the Lockvale watershed? Okay, we'll leave that as an open question.
That's a Jill Barron question.
Probably, yeah. Thanks, Brett. You want to add that to your list? Please do if you're comfortable.
Sure.
So, thank you. All right. Well, let's just take 5 minutes. If you need a bio break or refresh your coffee, I've got 2:42. If you're comfortable, we can come back just in 5 minutes at 2:47, and then we'll dive into the remainder of our topics for today. Thanks, everyone. See you in 5. right, welcome back, everybody. We have 4 more topics we wanted to dive into today. So let's go ahead and get started again. First up, this has been on the potential for discussion, certainly for a few years, but wanted to pose to the group, should there be an expansion of the focus area to include Morgan County? Some of the questions are there, do we have representation from there, either on the producer or county staff side, for example? Where do we fall on this question of Morgan County?
Well, have we talked to them about being included, and what was their reaction?
Anyone have insight there?
I don't know that we have done any direct outreach to folks in Morgan County. I know we at the state have not. I don't know that Jim or the Park Service have. I think where this question has come up in our mind is, from some of the maps that we've seen in prior presentations. I think Dr. Collette gave a map that showed a heavy population of producer facilities up the I-76 corridor and into Morgan County. And so, I think our thought process on this is that, if we are getting some level of significant contribution to deposition in the park that's originating in Morgan County, is that an area that should be part of the focus group? And so I think that's the kind of question that we're trying to ask is,
right,
do we have participation from folks in Morgan County currently? And if not, how could we go about getting better participation from that?
Yeah, great framing there, Josh. I know Jim has brought this up over the years that I've been involved as a possible question. He's obviously not here, but he would ask the same question, I think, the same way as Josh did. Go ahead. Who was speaking?
Well, one of the things that CLA has discussed is with a new website provider for the early warning system is going through and I guess kind of not editing, but looking at what producers are involved, because CLA is the only one that knows which producers are involved, and myself as a CLA member, I don't have access to that. Just our staff does, again, for that purpose of anonymity and aggregating data. But we've talked about going through that, and my gut tells me I think that we have some producers already involved in the early warning system for Morgan County, but I can't speak to that with in a definitive way. I would commit to talking with CLA staff and taking a look at that and reporting back. As well, in this process of changing web hosts or web providers for the early warning system website, we've talked about needing to go through there and making sure we have the right people at each producer signed up, because there's turnover and things happen, and this is not always the first thing that gets thought of to notify on. So we need to do a little housekeeping there, and I can kind of report back maybe at our next meeting on if we have producers already involved in Morgan County. And then, we've kind of talked about trying to do another level of outreach, even in Weld and Lerner counties, to see if we can bring more producers on. But I'll commit to checking into that and reporting back, but I can't speak to how much participation we have at this current time. But I do believe there is some.
Yep. Thanks for all that, Justin. Good feedback. They may be there, we're not sure, and you'll at least look into that as a question. Should we be more direct in that? I'll just open that up. Are there other parties in Morgan that would have a stake in this, besides potentially the county staff or others, that we would need to expand our own education and outreach around if we were to expand the formal focus area to include Morgan?
Yeah, I can say I don't know that we have regular contact with Morgan County staff. They are outside of the current ozone non-attainment area, and so do not participate in the rulemakings in the way that staff from other counties in the ozone non-attainment area do. So I would want to reach out and see what interest they have in this program if we were looking to expand the focus area. I think to Justin's point, understanding who might already be participating, and I think if we were to go through some type of a research project where we tried to assess individual events and whether there were hits or misses on the early warning system, I guess that would be one thing that we could potentially look into, having the data still be anonymized, but how many responses did we get from the counties, including Morgan County, with these events? And that might be an indication of participation level that we're seeing in the county already. And so I think if we were to start to think about what does I saw Anarelli put in the chat, a data mining research project look like for the early warning system. I think understanding participants, or maybe responses is a better word, from each county with respect to the warnings that were initiated would be really interesting is probably the right word to start to think about how to again, going back to the word optimize, how do we get the best out of the system that we currently have?
Yeah, I like that a lot, Josh. And I think so if we can say to the questions of, who should be involved, how do we feel about that? Who do we know is involved? I think we could take the moment of between now and the next meeting, for example, to try to collect and analyze that information. I would ask a geography question, and Russ, maybe this is you. The further the distance that is for some of these upslope events, do we have a sense that would be a bridge too far from a geography perspective, or is there some way to understand?
Yeah, not Morgan County. Morgan County is certainly close enough, and a lot of the time we include that in the warnings when we issue them. But further east than that, then I think it gets rarer.
Okay.
Like like Morgan Logan is probably still well within the region where that air gets up into the park, much less frequently like Phillips and Sedgwick out at the eastern border.
Okay. Yeah, appreciate you taking a stand there. So it would be within reason for us to include as a concept. Other ways to examine this from a physical, political, economic, producer population. It sounds like there's enough interest to continue this exploration so that we should consider the expansion. That doesn't mean we would, but we should consider it. I'm just reading between all the lines here today. Does everybody agree with that assessment? See some thumbs. Oh, we're going to lose Evan on the but follow up to the Quora. Yep, thank you. Okay. So yeah, we'll document that. We'll make that a point to continue to address going forward, the potential expansion into Morgan. Now, what about our next point here? Oh, thanks, Russ. We'll get you next time. Appreciate you. What about expansion and education and awareness campaign across the region? We had talked about and this really sort of fits into what we've been saying earlier, but you know, are there other vehicles, other communication channels, other people, other networks that we just currently don't interact with, or we seem to interact with too infrequently to be part of the normal conversation? I think one of our goals here should be to broadcast our role and our interest, both from a data perspective and from the science and from the participation in the group. We're doing a lot of work. If people aren't hearing about it, they can't help us. And really,
Yes, from my perspective, it makes more sense to put efforts into analyzing what we have and evaluating what we have now, so that we can have that baseline. So if we were to expand awareness and education, what metrics are we going to use? So is it, do we want an X amount increase in folks subscribe to the EWS, or is it survey response or something else? But I feel like anything to do with education and awareness should be much more strategic for a purpose, as opposed to just like, yes, we can communicate what we're doing, but yeah, I feel like we have bigger issues maybe right now that we need to focus our energy on. That's my thought.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, reactions to that?
I'll maybe just say that, you know, the whole conversation today has made me really think about what is our message. You know, the conversation that Justin kicked off about progress and you know, mitigating increases is a form of progress, not just are we on or off the glide slope and on or off the target towards the goal. And so I think there is a lot of value to getting our message out more broadly. But to Annarelli's point, I don't know if we have a full grasp of what that message is today. And part of this plan reassessment, plan reevaluation, I think will shape that message. And so I think this has been a very, very valuable conversation today and made me, you know, really think a lot about how do we demonstrate success? How do we demonstrate the progress we've already made? And make sure that that's part of the message, not just, you know, we're not on the glide slope. Because I think that's only one side of the coin. And I think we need to get we need to do a better job of getting a full message out there, not just about where we need to get to, but also the progress that we've made.
Yeah, I got you. Thanks, Judge. Reactions to that? Support? How does that sound? We work through this process today, through the next month, maybe the next 2 meetings. We get to a point where we feel we can summarize that progress with some confidence, and we have a point of view, as we say sometimes, on that progress, and that it is material, substantial, broad, whatever that may be, backed by science. That then is the impetus to go forward with a new, sort of updated message. What is our message to the public, to producers? I see some thumbs and some clapping even. Thanks. I love nonverbals, everybody. Just remember that. I'm watching.
I would note, I think that's consistent with what a lot's been done over the past years as well.
Yeah, well, and exactly. So our goal is to reflect. Yeah, I'm hearing this loud and clear. So we take the sum of the work that's been done, right, ever since we've convened, understanding what are the premises for that, some measurement and assessment of that progress, including potentially other ways to measure progress besides the glide path. And we package that into I guess, some sort of narrative or storytelling package that allows us to take that forward. Josh, you and I could work. Would like to put something in front. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully I'll be able to do this. Let's see here. I've been intrigued by this question of the mass balance, the question I asked earlier. And so I went looking around here. What I'd like to do just real quick, this will take only a second, but I want to point to a 2014 article that was directed at approximately a nitrogen balance on the Loch Vale watershed. And it includes Jill as a co-author. No doubt she was heavily involved in in everything that went on here. This is using USGS data and CastNet data and NADP data. And I just want to point a couple of things out here. This is in the heart of the article here. And what I want to point out here is, again, this is 2014. And so these are curves that show the nitrate yield. We'll get out into what that means just if people want to, but out of the outlet of the loch, that is what's coming out of the lake annually. And you accumulate it throughout the year. And the idea of the article was to relate that to how much deposition was going on in the park. So you get some sense of what's coming in from the atmosphere and what's going out via stream flow. And what's interesting to me here is that nitrate concentration, the loch is in the dark circles here. It peaks, at least in this window, this snapshot, it peaks around, let's see, 2004, 2005, and then a rapid decline thereafter. That's the nitrate concentration in the water. Then the accumulated nitrate yield, how many kilograms of nitrate per hectare of watershed area per year. That's what this chart is all about. And again, the loch data, loch outlet data are in the filled circles. Another peak right around 2005, 2004-ish, and then a rapid decline. If you look over here on these left plates, you see total nitrogen deposition decreasing from roughly the early 2000s to the time of publication, and then a slight, you have to cross your eyes to see it, but a slight decrease in wet nitrogen deposition and so forth. What I'm trying to point out here is that the question that Justin has raised is perhaps more apropos than we've given it credit for. There were, at least in the window represented by this study, already significant decreases in what I would say relevant ecological indicators, namely the concentration and accumulated annual discharge of inorganic nitrogen out of the loch itself, which is kind of the centerpiece of all of the inferences being made. It's not the only, I get it, it's not, but it is a centerpiece of the entire conversation. And so I think it's worth keeping that kind of a question in front of us at all times, even if it's maybe just in the back of our heads, that there are other measures that are relevant. And one of the conclusions this article draws, let me see if I can get to it here, is that reductions in nitrogen emissions and deposition on a regional scale should result in fairly immediate declines in stream nitrate concentrations in Loch Vale and in other watersheds in the Colorado Front Range. Now, that's not me saying that. That's Jill et al. Saying that. And so, again, this is just a way of emphasizing the importance of the question that Justin has raised.
Yeah, thank you, Brent, for that. Can you drop the link to that into the chat? We can make sure we get that out to everybody.
I'll be happy to note that I was able to get to it through my university library
Oh,
thing. So
right.
we shall see.
If you can maybe PDF, I don't know how, we definitely want to be able to share that with the group. I
Yeah.
can find a way. If you can get it to me in that format, I can get it to the group.
All right. I'll find a way to get it to you, Brian.
Yeah. I'm going to test the link right now and it's going to tell me log in. I need to log in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll figure a way to, assuming this constitutes fair use, I can provide the PDF to folks. So.
Thank you. Yeah, we're we're under 20 people, right? Wasn't that one of the old rules? So, at least today. All right. Yeah, thank you for that.
So I think this kind of segues into the next topic of the research projects, and that last sentence in the paper said something about analyzing climate effects. And so I think that also then gets to this question that Josh was posing earlier about like these hits and misses and truly understanding these cases, like just so case studies of what happened on this day and really understanding these days why, like, because I think, was it last time that there were days where there was you would have expected high deposition, but you actually didn't get any, and other days where you didn't, but you did. And so why? That sounds like it's related to everything.
Yes, thank you. And really. Yeah, this does get us to this question. Josh, you've mentioned some things you'd like to know. Thank you, Brent, for bringing up that study that really did address the the outlet, in fact. So that was well timed to bring up. Other areas that should be considered. I was thinking when I first thought about this, we started with some of our BMP practices and looking at what are the papers, that address this to try to understand what those best management practices were. And it felt like an exercise in futility sometimes, because the closer you looked at some of these papers, the more you realize that they didn't really address the exact situation that we're trying to understand in Rocky Mountain National Parks 2025, that kind of thing. On the other hand, there's a lot of research out there, but deciding which ones can be reliable and which we want to, say which practices or which research articles would have a material effect on the outcomes here if we were to even be able to encourage a universal adoption, proved to be much tougher, I think, than we might have thought. Bonnie, I know you looked at this a lot. Maybe look to your comments here as well of what research you would like to have that's not either planned now or available, and then which ones are areas that you think we should be considering, either looking for collaborators or additional funding around. So that's the broadest frame of this question, but certainly relevant to our work.
I don't know that I have an answer yet on BMPs specifically. I mean, I think, one of the conclusions that can kind of be drawn is there are some very effective best management practices when you're looking at production technologies, is what I talked about up in Greeley, and we're seeing a very high implementation rate for those practices. I mean, I think there are some places we can conclude that. I think as you get kind of further and further down, I think there is a law of diminishing returns. So that's probably a question too, is yes, there might be these other BMPs that could use research, but it's really hard to know where the juice is going to be worth the squeeze. Because really the best place to reduce emissions is by keeping more in the animal as much as you possibly can. So I don't have an answer for you, but I don't know if Sarah Place is still on the call. I don't know if she could speak to anything that's ongoing at CSU. They've presented before on like their kind of climate smart research and their smart feed bunks and stuff like that. And I thought there was some ammonia research planned, but I don't recall.
Hey there. Yeah, I can speak to that real briefly of just, we have done some work on looking at different production technologies. We haven't started measuring ammonia in any of those increasing nitrogen retention studies until just recently. So we're collaborating with National Institutes of Standards and Technology to do some measurement, but more from a whole facility standpoint. So less of that kind of experimental methods that would tell us a really specific like emission factor or anything, but more of just an overall general spot check from a standpoint of emissions in that facility. And would just echo that of, for sure, that's what we have observed of the pretty significant impact of production technologies, particularly in that late finishing phase of increasing nitrogen retention in animals and increasing growth, right, can have a big impact, since nitrogen retention in the animal equals muscle protein, right? So that is work that we do have, and thinking about those kind of things. But yeah, open to other thoughts, suggestions, things that we need to do or collect data on that dovetail into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
when
thank
is
you.
that, if I could just ask as a follow-up, when was that research with NIST? What is the overall timeline on that, just so we have a frame of reference?
Yeah, so that data collection is ongoing. So that is also, it's funded by a group that may be interested in connecting with this group, the NSF Engines, Colorado Wyoming engine, that is focused on a whole host of environmental issues, including air quality. And so they're looking always to try to fund things that are practical and more applied. So from a standpoint of thinking about where funding could potentially come from to do some of these things, that's a group to keep in mind potentially. So that work will kind of continue through the fall. And we'll probably get some more of our preliminary data, I would say, later fall.
Later fall. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sarah, you should always feel comfortable reaching out to me
Sure
if
thing.
you think there's relevant information or a speaker or just an introduction, right, to the group. We can have them join for one, and then offer, the microphone, so to speak, for 10, 20 minutes or whatever they would think would be useful. Certainly appreciate everything you've done. And so your network, if this is a way to broaden that, yeah, take advantage of that, please. Thank you.
Awesome.
Josh,
Brian,
or go ahead, whoever was speaking.
Brian, one thing I was going to throw out to what Bonnie and Sarah were speaking to, those production technologies, those are management practices that are typically employed throughout on an ongoing basis. They're not BMPs that are employed during early warnings. And we've typically collected that data on implementation through producer surveys, and that's probably something that we need to figure out a better way to maybe gather that data than just through the survey process. But that's something else the producers, I will commit to gathering up some producers and talking through that on how we can get our arms around those better quantifying the use of production technologies that lead to overall reduced emissions, not just during the early warning times, because I think those probably have the most profound opportunity for overall effect in reducing emissions.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, so the extent that if there's a process that this group could help organize or validate to support you in that, please make that request, right? There's things that we could potentially want to do. We've kept you in that relationship seat for all the right reasons, and yet, there are times when it feels like you may be doing things that this group could help, or we could ask for some assistance with. So don't feel like you got to do that all on your own. And I'd certainly be happy to help with some of those things as we move forward.
I appreciate that. I think trade associations are probably the best way to do that, because it gives producers a level of comfort on who they're talking to.
Yeah.
Versus hey, I'm with the state or I'm with EPA and I'm curious what you're doing on your place.
Yep, we understand that and want to protect that. So, but just if there's things behind the scenes or other structures or analysis of that you want, feel free to bring that forward. Josh.
Yeah, and maybe to kind of jump on to the last comment that Justin made. That's not a unique experience to ag. We see that with other industries as well, especially when we are looking at voluntary or innovative type of programs. And we've worked through METEC up north, as well as other groups when there has been significant concern about the anonymity of the data. And so I think that is something that we would be willing to explore further in this scenario, as well as if we were to develop some type of a research project through CSU or other group that ag is comfortable working with, the data could be in theory reported directly to that group, aggregated and anonymized before being provided to the state. And so I think there are potentially opportunities if the producers are more comfortable working with folks that they've worked with historically on various topics, to set up a project or set up a research opportunity in that way. I mean, obviously we'd have to design it, we'd have to figure out how to fund it. The AQE is one potential option. The NSF engine that was just identified by Sarah, I think would be another potential option to look at funding as a way to have the transparency is probably the right word, of a third party collection of the data, but in a way that protects the individual producers and doesn't necessarily become a way to just point fingers at one portion of the ag industry or one individual producer. I think that's always the concern with trying to go to the more granular producer specific type of data. And so understanding what we could do seasonally or with different granularity of data, and then figuring out a way to collect that data in a way that protects the identity of the producers, is something I think we should really be looking into.
Josh, are there any studies that CDPHE is planning or has completed with ammonia?
Not to my knowledge. I don't remember if they were going to have ammonia analyzers on any of the ozone mobile monitors or flyover data that they were trying to work on. But I would have to check on that, but I don't believe that they were.
Okay. I keep hearing about some project called Corn Cob. I don't know, something about ammonia, and I'm pretty sure it was CDPHE.
I've never heard of that project, so.
Okay. Hold on.
All right. So Josh, as a follow-up to your comment, so as we think about this last fourth bullet here at the bottom, right, which you're starting to address, what are the areas from a demographics, right, in the focus area that we could begin this correlation? And that's been the holy grail, I guess, of all of this research of how do we know that the best practices would be reliable. Oh, I see something here. Oh, thanks, Ennerly. Ammonia, methane, and ethane. Huh. We should see that today. Thank you for that. Interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Ennerly. Today's the first I have heard of that, so very interested to see what it is.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a report whenever that's ready, or like an alert for that. But I think I talked to AgNext folks and they're not involved. So I'm assuming it's CSU Atmospheric Science Department. But I really have no idea.
We'll make sure to keep that in the notes and ask that as another follow-up question as we move into the next meeting. Thank you. Again. Josh, you had more thoughts here? No?
No, I was just reading the blurb on that. I don't know that that's actually happening through CDPHE or that we're tied into it in any way. If it's CSU and NIST that are working on it.
It's on the CDPHE website.
Yeah, like I said, I'll have to look into it more. I'm not aware of it, so.
Yeah.
All right, so that still leaves the broader question. What are some areas that we think where we would believe a priority in research should be? Are there any studies that are not being planned or should be planned? And in particular, this fourth bullet around the ability to connect the deposition with the emissions.
Just from my perspective, it sounds like we need to prioritize data mining or understanding better the current situation with the early warning system of like the usage and what else did they, Justin was saying like surveys and all, and then who's participating.
Right.
I think that all kind of envelops with the other things that we're looking at. So some like really robust analysis of the data we already have through the early warning system. And then the other part is the precipitation component of these events that Josh mentioned earlier, of just case studies of understanding why does it sometimes is there a high deposition event when there shouldn't have been, or vice versa. I think that is very important because that will get us even finer, I guess, a narrower focus on what the issue is. But that way you're looking at the science and the yeah, I guess like the science component, but also the evaluation of the EWS program at the same time. And I think that would give you a good baseline understanding of what's going on. I'm seeing this from the perspective of someone that isn't necessarily part of this or hasn't been part of this for that long. Those are the two things that I would care about and I would be curious about from like the public perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I think you're right. On at least the second point, Russ and I had chatted. I think it was after the November meeting and a little bit in advance of the February meeting about that outlier, that 2023 year, and what was really going on, where we might have expected more deposition and based on the forecast and the winds and had it been really wet, I think, for 2 weeks prior, and there were these sort of uniquenesses of that period that caused us to not be able to really explain the deposition levels. And he and I had talked about potentially running a little workshop actually at the Greeley event in May. And as we got into it a little bit and some of the planning, we struggled with the data that we would need to be able to really engage the group in that discussion, because we don't have everything you'd want to know about that. So it came down to we would we would probably say these are the things that we don't understand that happened around that period, and therefore we can't explain the outcome. So we dial back that exercise from being part of the agenda. I do think there's some appetite around that on his part to look at it, but it would require perhaps a longer lead time to understand what questions would we need to ask in advance, and then try to get the data, with a longer lead time. So if that's something that I can put on a future agenda, I will, if this group, if that would be helpful. Justin.
It just occurred to me, I think that's a really important thing to include in how we tell our story and measures of success, is how utterly complicated this issue is, because it's dealing with biological systems, not only at the park, but biological systems in agriculture, be it crop production or animal production. It's not measuring tailpipe emissions coming out of a car, coming out of a power plant. And I think that message can easily be lost sometimes. And I don't know how we message that, but I think that's critically important to talk through as we tell our story, and the challenges and the successes, and just making sure we don't lose that piece.
Yeah, well said. Bonnie?
I do agree with Anarelli. I think it would be very interesting to maybe pick a year or 2 years and really try to look at those high deposition events and try to figure out where they were coming from. And to me, it's something that probably needs funding, and who does that analysis and where that funding comes from. I don't know. I have no money. I have no extra time. So I'm not helpful for that conversation, but I think it would be good. And especially because, it'd be interesting to know what, if anything, has changed. I think the Roman study, a lot of the conclusions there was that when you have high deposition, it's almost always coming from the west, or I'm sorry, from the east. But now we've got several years of Russ running this early warning system and saying, that's not quite what we've seen. We've triggered these warnings. We haven't seen deposition, or there has been some high deposition weeks where we had no indication that there was anything going on in the east. So, and I will say, I think 2023 is a very anomalous year, just from my perspective at living through that weather. But maybe it's trying to pick a year or two. I think the nice thing about it is you kind of start with those high deposition events, and it narrows your focus. And my understanding is there's really only like a dozen of those per year. So it's not like we have to look at every single day or every single week. But I just wanted to second that. I think Anarelli is onto something there, and Russ has talked about it, and how we fund it and who does that, I don't know, but I think it's a question worth answering.
Okay, so I'll elevate that for continued discussion, and it may take a cycle or two, right, to get through all of that. What are the questions? What is the available data? What are the remaining questions or data that we would need? That's where we sort of left it in the spring, so we didn't pursue that in Greeley. But I will. I'll pick that
Sounds
up.
like it would be beneficial to have some kind of subgroup for that kind of project, to really lay out exactly like what do we need, and then identifying, well, what are sources of funding that we could apply to. I can donate my time to help write grants, because I think I can do that. But yeah, so just leveraging each other's knowledge of who's got what money.
Yeah, well, I appreciate we've learned more about that NSF as well. Josh, you mentioned that, so let's keep all of this in mind.
When it comes to ag data, I was planning to reach out to the National Agricultural Statistics Service and talk to them. There's a gentleman I talked to on the industry side to see if there's any specific data they could pull together for us that would be of interest, because there's only so much that's available public facing. And it is also, I would say, the NASS is by far the most robust source of animal numbers, milk production, meat production. We've been somewhat limited in what's publicly facing. We can't parse it down to focus area and can't always, parse it down to year because some of that data is only done during census years, although I think they kind of ask a lot of questions that would pertain to us on a more routine basis. So I will reach out to them to see if there's something in particular they could provide for the focus areas. So I think that's a potential data source for animal numbers and maybe meat production and milk production. It all depends. They're very careful about not accidentally identifying individual producers. But I think if we ask for kind of amalgamated data, they might be able to get us something a little different. And then I'll just throw this idea out to the group. I mean, when it comes to something like production technologies, there's a limited number of companies that supply those. Is there any benefit, or should we reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to give us Colorado specific data, what they're selling, how many head that would cover? I mean, I just feel like the companies that provide implants and things like that, I'm sure have a massive amount of data. I don't know if they'd have any they'd want to share with us, but could that be a metric that would be of interest to this group if we knew there was X amount of these technologies going in use in Colorado?
That's interesting. Do you have anybody in mind, Bonnie, that sort of is at the top of that list?
I never worked on that side of things when I was in the industry in terms of the companies that supply those products. But I guess it's.
I can get with Bonnie. I think that's a good idea versus trying to survey producers. It may be easier to get more all-encompassing data.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I don't know if those companies will share that or not, but I'll circle back with Bonnie and we can kind of make a game plan for how to do that. If you're comfortable with that, having that conversation, Bonnie.
Yeah, and I guess part of it, my ask is to, Josh and folks at the Park Service, is that something that you would find compelling for telling our story? Because we are realizing that the surveys are difficult and time consuming. I'm trying to come up with creative other data sources.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a way to understand the usage rate or the implementation rate, I don't know what the right word is, of these production-based technologies as opposed to response type BMPs, I think that does, help to tell the story. I guess where I would want to understand is if there was a way, at least qualitatively, to assess how much nitrogen avoidance, maybe is the right way to say it, happens with these technologies, as opposed to, and maybe it's a mass balance of some kind, how much is put onto the animal versus how much is, potentially, excreted and goes to the atmosphere or to the water or to the holding ponds, or, all the different ways that it can, leave the animals. So I think, if this is something that is widely used, I think it's a way to tell part of that story of the avoidance of worse impacts, because people look at the information and say, oh, well, if you're producing more meat, you're producing more head of cattle, you're producing more chickens, that just must be increasing the deposition at the park. And I think this is a way to say, these are, maybe technology isn't the right word, but these are advancements within the industry that are making it more efficient and leading to a reduction in emissions. I think is maybe the way I would think about framing it. But yeah, if there's a willingness to share that data on an aggregated basis, ideally by county or, or percentage of total population in the counties. I don't know, how they would break those data points down, but I think it'd be really interesting data to take a look at and try and understand.
I would ask if Dr. Place is still on the call.
Yes.
Is this, I would think that this would be in your area of expertise, Dr. Place. Is this something that if we could get our hands on that data, that you would be willing to have some conversations with us? I don't want to commit you to something and act next to something, because I know your plate's full, but just talking through how to quantify potential reductions through use of production technologies, if we could quantify the adoption rate of those technologies.
Yes. Yep. We could probably come up with some sort of way to highlight that avoided emissions piece, right? Because of the efficiency of the industry. Yep.
Thank you. I'll
Sure
circle
thing.
back with you and Bonnie as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great connection. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. I'm just mindful of time, and I wanted to have the discussion about the August meeting here. Josh, not to bias your thinking, but there seems to be a lot of moving parts here, a lot of interest to keep this going. So I might say that we should try to find a way to meet, even if just virtually, on the 7th. Everybody's blocked that date and is typically available for those. Moving that I think we might lose some participation and some momentum, but I know there's a lot more going on, and everyone has things in the summer that are competing for time and attention. So maybe I'll just turn it back to you, and let's see if we can come up with an agreement.
Yeah, I mean, if there is interest from this group to continue to try and meet, on the 7th, as I mentioned earlier, the caveat is that, we still got to get the contract in place, and for, those of you on the call, the way some of the state contracting stuff works, when we exceed a certain threshold, we can no longer just do a one-time PO. We have to do a more extensive process, and that's the process that we're in right now. And admittedly, I am behind on getting that to where it needs to be. And so there is the potential that contract is not fully executed and ready to go on the 7th. I'm happy to continue to try and hold that date and try to hit that date. But, if 2 to 3 weeks from now, we're not at a point where that's going to happen, then we're canceling on a much shorter notice.
Any thoughts or reactions to that? Should we try for the 7th and make adjustments as we get closer?
I think that sounds good.
Thanks, Holly.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, because I thought I pretty well have it on my calendar. So as far as we're concerned, it's going to happen then.
Understood. Justin, I get a thumb up. Thank you. All right. Well, let's take that as a premise. Josh, we'll definitely nimble. I would love to support this group. I know we have to have happy paper, but I'm really interested in happy people. So maybe we can pull off both.
No, I'm happy to continue to try and shoot for that. I just want to be very upfront with people that, this is where we're at in the process.
Yeah. I appreciate you being candid. That's all we need. So.
And then as always, we're continuing to watch what's going on at the federal level, and there's obviously a lot going on in DC right now with votes on a major budget bill that is going to have ripple impacts through a lot of us. And so I think we just have to be as nimble as we can and be willing to adjust along the way to whatever's thrown at us.
Yeah, this is going to be a challenging year for everyone, state and federal. That's where those resources have been there in the past.
Well, and it's going to trickle down to industry, to producers. I mean, there is a lot going on that is going to change funding streams, not just for government, but for other groups as well.
Yeah, great point. All right. Well, at this point, I'll just pause. Any other topics or walk-on items, maybe something that we breezed through too quickly today, in hopes of trying to cover each of the items that we had. Anything left for the good of our discussions? All right. Well, thanks everyone for one extra day at the end of the fiscal and in the middle of summer. Appreciate all the energy. They've got a lot of good notes. We'll compile those up and share those back out here as soon as we can. And then we'll highlight any of the action items that folks have signed up for. Thank you everyone for committing to those. We could not make progress unless we're doing that between our meetings. So you're all wonderful. Take care and have a safe summer. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone.
Y'all.